Hello and welcome to the Chris and Bud Show. My name is Chris Scarborough, and with me is my co-host, my friend, and my brother in pod, Mr. Bud Bohannon. Together we'll be taking you on a nostalgic ride discussing a wide array of topics from our childhood through today, hoping to share a bunch of laughs along the way.
Yeah, you know what time it is. It's time.
No, not yet.
Can I go now?
Yeah, now.
It's time for the Chris and Bud Show.
Hello, welcome back. My name is Chris.
And I am Bud.
And today we're going to be talking about a couple systems here, the Nintendo Entertainment System, Super Nintendo, and Sega Genesis, just kind of going through time spent with these consoles and some of the video games that we enjoyed on them. We're going to start talking about, I guess, our first memories of childhood and how we got introduced to video games in general. Bud, you want to lead off with us?
Yeah, so for me, video games, I picked up as early as a kid. I lived not so much in a community. I kind of lived by myself. For me, it was a little bit harder to go out and do normal kid things like, riding a bike and playing all kinds of different games with other children of your neighborhood, like playing out in the street and stuff. So for me, I was definitely glued to the TV as a kid, and video games became that main source of my attention. I had a sister growing up, so me being a boy and having a sister, we didn't see eye to eye on much. She's playing with Barbie dolls and drawing and that kind of stuff, but we did watch movies together, and that's about as far as our common interest went. So for me, it was definitely video games. How about you, Chris?
Yeah, so for me, it was kind of weird. When I was a kid, definitely was when I was with my grandpa and my uncles. Most of that stuff happened, though, when I would go to visit them for like Christmas or some special occasion, whenever my dad decided we were going to go up there and visit. So I didn't really have a console until I was 5, 6, 7, somewhere in that range. I had a brother, so all of my video games had to be two-player, just kind of the way it was. We really didn't get like super into video games until much later, but obviously we did have a lot of experience with some of these consoles simply, if not for no other reason than when we'd visit our grandpa. It'd be something that we could do to get away from all the other stuff we were doing. Like he had like a small farm, so we kind of like goof off with him a little bit outside. He used to like to we'd have to chuck corn and stuff like that. So playing video games was cool. A cool little release. I had an uncle that was about my age. He was a few years older than me, so he was kind of like the trendsetter for us. So he got into video games at a young age, and his brother was about 10 years older than him. So he didn't really have anybody in his age range. So for when I would come to visit, me and him were pretty close. So I got into video games mostly because of him. We're going to lead in our first system we're going to talk about today is the Nintendo Entertainment System. It was released October 15th, 1985. The cost at the time was about $180. Adjusted for inflation today, it'd be roughly $428. So that's a lot of money in today's time, even for a system that was released so long ago. I'll give you a couple brief games that I remember mostly on this system, and then Bud, you can follow up with any that you might have. Duck Hunt, of course, and the original Super Mario Brothers. Obviously, those two were the ones that I remember the most that came with the system at the time when we were buying them in our time period. All the Super Mario Brothers, so Super Mario Brothers 2 and Super Mario Brothers 3. I remember playing them on that system. Tetris, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Battletoads, Donkey Kong, the original Donkey Kong. That's probably Mike Tyson's Punch-Out. Those are the ones probably above all else is the ones I remember the most. Bud?
My games, I haven't typed out on the list here, so please don't think that I'm recalling them this well off my memory, because trust me, my brain don't work that well. Battletoads, Kirby's Adventure, Mega Man 2 and 6, Maniac Mansion, Metroid, Tetris, Dr. Mario, Airwolf, Final Fantasy, Air Fortress, Mario 1, 2, and 3, Zelda, and Duck Hunt. And there's probably some that I've missed. I'd have to go into my box of collectibles and pull them up and figure out what I missed. Games that have been sitting for a while.
Let's start on some of them, the more obscure ones. Like, Bud, what was that one game you just said?
Maniac Mansion.
Yeah, that one. Can you give me a kind of a brief description of kind of what happened and how that game worked?
Yeah, so Maniac Mansion was developed by LucasArts, who also made Star Wars. It was a point-and-click adventure. The plot of the story was your character was Dave. and your girlfriend Sandy got kidnapped by the people that lived in said mansion. You had 6 other friends you could pick from, and each friend had their own individual strength. So like one was a photographer, one was a rock star, one was a nerd, so he was good with electronics. The other was a writer, and I forget what the other 2 were, or 1. I don't know. I wasn't good at math. Anyway, it was a point and click game, so it was like go to. You had to click go to, then click door, and then you go to the door, then you had to click open, and then hover over the door, and then it would open the door. But what made that game interesting to me, even as a kid, was it had multiple endings in it. You could rescue Sandy one way, or you could have another outcome happen by like the police come and take the people that lived in the house. Or you could have another outcome happen where a police officer from a different planet would fly in and take Doctor was working on in his basement. It's really weird whenever you don't understand the plot of it, because it's kind of out there. You know, like I said, it was made by LucasArts. But when I was young, it was really nice to have that kind of game with multiple endings, because it really added through playability to it. It wasn't like Mario where, you know, you just got this stage, you got to go do this stage, and then you go and beat Bowser, and then you get the little congratulations message that you won.
Yeah, definitely sounds like a pretty interesting game. I looked it up. It looks like it's on Steam, so something we might be able to maybe look into one day.
That may be Day of the Tentacle that you're thinking of. That is the sequel to Maniac Mansion. It was made on I think it was made on Windows 95, if I remember right.
It's amazing when you think about just the time periods. So for me, obviously, the games that kind of fit everything that I remember mostly about Nintendo Entertainment System is Duck Hunt and the original Super Mario Brothers. Obviously, they came with the system. You bought it, I guess, only in America. I don't know if it ended up being in Japan as well, but I know that they re-released it with those games included, and it really helped boost the sales. Duck Hunt was such a game that kind of made me so mad, I guess, as a very young kid, 4 or 5 years old, just doing my best and not quite understanding how it worked, why it worked. That stupid dog just laughing at you every time. Very, very frustrating.
Yeah, especially as a kid, because you don't know how to line up the sights of a gun. You don't even know what the sights of a gun are. Like, all I used to do was hold the gun upside down because the end of the barrel was angled. So I'd hold it upside down. That way it was flat against the TV screen, and I'd just follow the duck on the TV screen.
Yeah, I remember my grandfather. It's one of the very few times he ever played a video game. He was playing. He got really pissed off at one of the ducks because he's like, "Nah, listen, I know how to shoot a duck. I shot that duck, and I can't believe that duck didn't fall." And I said, I don't know what to I don't know what to tell you, Grandpa. I'm 5 years old. What? So that was the last time I remember him ever really playing a video game. He said, "I'm done with this shit." And he threw it down, and he went and made him a new dining table. That was what he kind of did. He was a man's man. He was always out there lacquering up his table or whatever. So he kind of just gave it up,
doing stuff that mattered.
Yeah, not playing video games like we did and still do. Obviously, the other game in that equation was Super Mario Brothers. Definitely not the best Super Mario Brothers. That might be a debate, I guess. Some people might think so, but
which one? Super Mario 2?
The original.
Oh,
no, the original Super Mario Brothers. Yeah. I wouldn't say it's the best one. I was just wondering if people might argue that. Probably. I'm sure there's some purists that think that's the best one, but for me, I always struggled with that one. Obviously, I was a kid when I was playing it. I never was really good at that one. It was one of those ones that you're kind of like, you did your best, but you just kind of made it to however far you made it, then you just started over. Who cares, right? At that time, you had patience, and you just were more about playing a video game more so than like beating the video game. It was just being able to play the video game, I guess.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. My order for the Mario games would be 3 was my favorite, then 1, then 2.
Yeah, of just the Super Mario Brothers, I completely agree. Gets a little more convoluted when you add in like Super Mario World and stuff and Super Nintendo. But yes, in the original Nintendo, definitely 3. I think 3 probably changed Nintendo's outlook on a lot of things. I think that one, I don't know if that's the best-selling game, but it's got to be up there for the original Nintendo Entertainment System. It's about as good as a video game could get, especially in 1980, whatever time it was released, in the mid-'80s, late 80s. I'm not sure exactly, but it had to be released sometime in that time frame because it was a heck of a game, really.
So, Chris, the most popular selling game here on NES was Super Mario Brothers 1. It had 40,240,000 sales, and the second all-time selling game for that was Duck Hunt, which they kind of come together. Then it was Super Mario Brothers 3, which came out in October 23rd, 1988, so 3 years later than Mario 1, and it sold 18 million units.
Oof.
So 18 million versus 40 million.
Yeah, I think that had to do with time period, of course. We'll get into it, but Genesis was released basically right when Super Mario Brothers 3 was released on the original Nintendo system. And then Super Nintendo was released the following 2 years later. So I guess if we adjusted Super Mario Brothers 3 on this SNES, I would guess it's probably closer, considering the original Super Mario Brothers was released basically with that system. So every one of those systems that they sold, you kind of got the game too. So it might be slightly inflated. But yeah, do you have any other games that you might be interested in talking about?
Yeah, the Air Fortress game I listed, that one holds a special place for me because me and my grandma used to play it. My grandma was a nighttime nurse, and she used to get back to the house around 9 or 10 at night. So she would come and pick me up at my parents' house, and I'd go stay the night with her. We go play video games. And Air Fortress was kind of like a side-scroller flying game, kind of like, Galaga, but on a side-scroller, not top-down. And there was another game, too, that we used to play all the time that was on the Super Nintendo. Yeah, I mean, the other games like Tetris and Dr. Mario, I still found those kind of enjoyable, but they're also kind of boring. Because, as a young person, you don't care much about puzzle games. As I get older, I do appreciate puzzle games more. Because, it's nice challenging your brain every once in a while, not just playing some very linear, go here, beat this, get to the end of the stage, beat the game.
Well, and unfortunately for the Nintendo Entertainment System, I mean, it was released 3 years before either one of us were born. So basically, most of these systems were released before we were even able to play video games. All three were released before we were able to play video games. So it's one of those things where it's like you kind of were at the tail end. So any of the games that if you looked at like a top 10 or a top 25 or a top 100 games released on the Nintendo Entertainment System, I'm sure there's a lot of games on there that we didn't really have an opportunity to play. At least in that time period. The goal is to talk about what we remember kind of right around the time when it was released, not necessarily games that we may have went back and played later, so much as to kind of encapsulate the nostalgia of that time period. So it's one of those things where, unfortunately, the Nintendo Entertainment System kind of like lags behind in our lifetime, kind of the games that we got to play. That's why we really didn't talk about, or that's why we started here and didn't talk about, say, the Atari that came out in the 70s and some of those other ones that may have came before that, is because we really didn't have any experience with it in our lifetimes in terms of in the moment or in the time period thereof. The next console that we're going to kind of briefly talk about, unfortunately, kind of hurts my heart a little bit, is the Genesis. Unfortunately, the Sega Genesis, Bud never really played.
No.
So there's not a whole lot of banter back and forth or conversation we can have about it. But I do want to give a couple shout outs.
Sonic.
Kind of about, yeah. I think that whoever was the person who was directing them on terms of how they were going to do their marketing and all that stuff, that person, I'm sure they're still in the video game industry if they haven't passed away by this point, but they killed it. This was released in 88, but in general, kind of like how they knew to get someone like me to convince my mom, or at least yell at my mom or complain to my mom enough to try to get me a Genesis, because that's exactly what happened.
They were good car salesmen.
Yeah, they did a great job. I think that above all else, like Nintendo at that point, kind of the time period we're talking about, they've already sold themselves. You put Mario on anything at that point, I think it would sell. It didn't matter. Lunchboxes, backpacks, whatever, and kids were buying it. So it's one of those things where Sega Genesis had to come up with its whole, like, it was brand new. It had nothing. It was basically from the ground up, so it had nothing really to base its life off of. And that's where Sonic come from. But to give a brief little introduction on the Sega Genesis, it was released in October 29th of 1988. Still was released before I was born, and you, Bud, I'm pretty sure, right?
When did you say it was released again?
The 29th of October in 1988.
Yeah, it was 1 month.
Couple weeks,
before.
right?
Yeah, 1 month.
Yeah. So the cost of it is $189 at the time. It purposely undercut the Super Nintendo, which didn't release for another basically 2 years. Adjusted for inflation, it's about $393, which is a pretty respectable price. Still pretty expensive in today's time. But a couple games that I just want to give a shout out to that I remember playing as a kid.
Sonic?
Shining Force. Yeah. Shining Force 1 and 2. Streets of Rage 2 and 3. I didn't really remember 1 that much. Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine, did not like that game as a kid. Sonic the Hedgehog, the original 2 and 3, but 2 was my jam. Golden Axe, Columns, Echo the Dolphin, Road Rash 3, and Bubsy 2. Couple little tidbits about kind of the time spent with some of these games. Bubsy has a pretty soft place in my heart, similar to your story with your grandmother. This one was with my mom. Although my mom didn't really have patience for us, it was one of those things where she kind of like let us play some of the early levels. And then after a certain point, she just kind of shoot us off. But we did play together. She really wanted to beat the game. It never really worked out for her because we would always cause issues.
Yeah,
but
well, that's the difference between parents and grandparents, though. You know that.
Yeah. Yeah. So I just remember a lot of fond memories just of that game because Sega went in a totally different sort of, they went for a different style and a lot of their games kind of showed that off. And Bubsy was one of those. It was kind of like a comedic, similar to like a Roadrunner style to some extent. Like he broke the fourth wall, so to speak. There's a lot of cool little things that he did that was really, really neat and unique for the time. Road Rash was another game I had a lot of fun playing. I used to play it at my cousin's house. We would basically what you're just riding around on a motorcycle and you got a billy club. So as people get close to you, you can hit them with your billy club. That was really hilarious and a lot of fun as a 5, 6, 7-year-old kid who's swinging a billy club and knocking people over and knocking them off their bikes and stuff like that. Streets of Rage, I played that a lot with my brother. You get to pick two characters since we could play on a side scroller together. 2 out of the 4 characters, and you got to just kind of like beat up people, which was awesome. I don't think we ever beat the game. I think the whole goal was just like we'd get as far as we could until we started to argue too much to the point that we could never finish. I don't know why you're doing that, John. And then John, which is my brother, he would be like, I didn't do anything. And we used to split the screen, for example, where he would fight all the enemies that would come to the top half of the screen, and then I would fight all the ones that would come to the bottom half of the screen. And in Streets of Rage in particular, you could still do damage to each other. So it's like if you hit each other, you had friendly fire was on. I don't think there was any way to turn it off. So what we'd do is like if someone accidentally hit you, he'd be like, you better give me my free shot back. I don't know why we thought that way, but it's one of those things where it's like if you hit me, I get to hit you back, and it's like we're all on the same team here. But it's just I just remember that very, very vividly. Just kind of like we ended up beating up each other almost as much as we beat up the enemies by the time, especially after the first couple levels, because the first few sort of levels and worlds are pretty easy. And then after you get to a certain point, it starts to get a little more difficult, of course. And like once you get to like those more difficult ones, you're just kind of like you're so frustrated with each other because you're sitting next to each other in this close quarters, sitting on the floor, laying down, whatever. We used to have one of those old school TVs that sat on the ground, the big old box TVs. That was heavy as all get out, and so we would be laying down and we'd be playing that way. And it's one of those things where it's like after a while you start pushing each other, whatever. It was just we'd only get so far before we ended up wrestling and beating each other up and stuff. So, but I have a lot of fond memories of playing that, just thinking back on it. But of course, the pinnacle of Sega Genesis is Sonic the Hedgehog 2. I'm sure some people might try to argue and say it's Sonic 1, but Sonic the Hedgehog 2, I think fondly about the game still to this day. It was the first game that I ever beat from start to finish.
Really?
And yes, I did as like an 8 or 9-year-old kid. Now, granted, you got to think about it. I was always playing with my brother. And like I said, we never had an opportunity. We'd always beat each other up and you never finished games. So it just never happened. So I remember it happened, and there wasn't really save features per se at the time period. And I don't even think Sonic had any like codes where you could kind of jump back into a game. So it's like either you played it all the way through or you just didn't finish. And maybe there was those things.
No, you burn the console down that way you don't have to ever turn it off.
Yes. Yeah. Well, right. So like you were in a situation where you just didn't have the same flexibilities maybe we have today. So it had to be just, I guess, because my brother was around. We just never had the opportunity to finish a game. Did you get bored, or he would get bored? And then it's like, dude, you can't quit playing a game because it's a 2-player game. You can't play it by yourself. You can't drop in and out. So it's like, ugh. But yes, Sonic the Hedgehog 2 was the first game I remember from start to finish beating. I just remember that game fondly. I had so much fun playing it. You learn all the little tidbits, this, that, and the other thing that how you can do this, you can do that, and it all kind of works out for you. So I just remember you're in like this giant helicarrier and you're kind of running along the side of the helicarrier and like you're jumping and it's like you're catching on to like certain places. It's trying to blow you off of it. I just remember that part towards the very end of the game, and it's just kind of, it just brings back a flood of memories, just like good times spending. Like I said, we would have to alternate. So as brothers, even though you could play Tails in the second one, we would still alternate each death. So if I started at the very first levels, it would be you would play one level each because you wouldn't die in the very beginning. So to the point where you weren't able to get any sort of like rhythm going. That's when you'd start bartering. Hey man, let me have one more life and you can have 2 next. You start bartering and doing whatever you can to try to get as much playtime in as you can. But yeah, I remember fondly just playing Sonic the Hedgehog 2 and beating it. And, as 6, I don't know, however old it was in my early 5, 6, 7s.
Was that all that you had for Sega Genesis?
Yeah, I didn't know if you wanted to add anything about Sonic at all.
Well, I never played the game when I was a kid, but I loved the hell out of the cartoon and the character. So I really enjoyed the story behind them. And I don't know how accurate that was according to the video game. Because like I said, I didn't play the game when I was young. I didn't play it till I was much later probably 10, 11, 12, somewhere around that age range. But yeah, I just really like the character, and I really like the cartoon. And I just found out like a couple years ago that it was voiced by Jaleel White, who is the voice of Steve Urkel on Family Matters. That one kind of threw me for a loop.
One thing that I learned, and I texted Bud about this a couple days ago, is that a lot of these games are available now in the App Store to download for free with ads, of course. They do charge to remove the ads, but be able to relive some of these memories without having to have those consoles. I know some of these games are on the Xbox Marketplace, I think, anyway. Or they were on the 360, some of them anyway. You know, they have Sonic the Hedgehog, and they have, let's see what I downloaded, Shining Force, Sonic 1 and 2, Streets of Rage 1 and 2, and Dr. Mario World are the ones that I downloaded specifically. And that just gives you kind of the nostalgia feel. You can go back in time, kind of play those games, kind of see how it was. I do kind of cheat. I play it on a tablet, and I have my little Xbox controller connected to it just to kind of make it a little easier. Definitely a good time to be able to relive some of those memories. Don't hit the pause button. We're still rolling. But it's time for some questions. Question time, question time. Everybody loves question time. What would you change about yourself if you could, bud?
Well, I would probably have to go with my stubbornness. I am kind of an old man set in my ways. It's very, very hard to convince me, especially with products. Like, I've got what I have that works, and I'm just not willing to change. You know, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. What about you, Chris?
Well, I guess if I could change anything about myself, it would be sort of, I guess, how I deal with my anger and how I transition that into something positive versus using it maybe negatively. Thank God, my stubbornness is definitely lessened as I've gotten a little older with children and stuff like that. But yeah, my biggest thing, if I could change one thing about myself, it would certainly be maybe redirecting my anger better.
Yeah, we could all do that a little better. And now, let's get back to the show.
The last, and the most popular amongst both of us consoles that we're going to talk about is the Super Nintendo. I think that defined us.
That was the winner right there.
Yeah, it defined my childhood, at least my early childhood. I guess I group it in a certain way, like pre-10, before I was like 10 years old, 10, 11 years old. Like, these were the consoles you played. And then after that, it gets different, you know, with the PlayStations, the Xboxes, that sort of stuff. But like, this was the pinnacle. This was as good as it gets. This was the best game. This had the best games. It was the best system. It's weird because a lot of these had crossover, so it's not like you played them because it was on Super Nintendo necessarily. Now, it did have good games that were specific just to the console. But it's so funny that when you talk to anybody, it's not even specifically just me and you, but if you talk to any of our friends about this generation, like, what console did you remember the most? Genesis doesn't get brought up often, unfortunately. I wish it did. But Super Nintendo, it's like, that was my jam. SNES, whichever way you want to word it, whether it's Super Nintendo or SNES, it's like, that was my thing. But I'll let you go first, kind of naming some of the games that you enjoyed playing.
Alrighty. The SNES. I love it. Mega Man X 1, 2, and 3. Mega Man X is still, to this day, in my list of favorite games. Super Mario World, Super Mario All-Stars, which was all the original Marios on Nintendo, kind of rebooted with better graphics and music. Street Fighter 2, Donkey Kong 1, 2, and 3. Mario Paint, which was pretty unique. Mario Kart, which definitely preferred the 64 version, but it was still cool on the SNES because there was no other racing game like it. Kirby's Dream Course, that was the other game that I played with my grandma. Kirby Superstar, Joe and Mac, Star Fox, Batman Returns, Final Fantasy. I don't remember which number it was at that time. I think it was like 4 or 5.
Yeah, 4, 5, and 6.
Yeah, and then Mystic Quest, which was actually, I think it was made by the same people that made Final Fantasy, or it was a Final Fantasy knockoff. I don't remember exactly. It was too far ago. The Kirby's Dream Course, that game was kind of cool because to this day, I still like Kirby. Like, I have Kirby used as my avatar on a lot of my online accounts because he's just he's a pink blob that just eats people. Like, me and him relate on a personal level. You know, I don't eat people, but I do like to eat food. Let me just clarify that before the feds show up at my door. But yeah, we used to play that game a lot, me and my grandma, because it was something that she was also decent at too. And the premises of that game was it was kind of like a golf game where you had these different courses and you had different enemies sitting around the map And if you bump into one of the enemies, you gain their powers. So like you could turn into a tornado and zoom ass across the map. You could bump into like one of them parasailing guys that has the umbrella. If you put too much power on your shot, you could pop that ability and slow your roll real quick. You had some other abilities and enemies there and different holes and layouts and hills and different types of terrain that would slow down your roll speed. It was really, really fun. Mario Paint, that game was unique for me because it came with a mouse, pretty much that's identical to a computer mouse in today's time. It was kind of like a coloring book where you could draw and fill in colors and stuff. Like I remember the first one I finished was actually the cover art for Super Mario World, you know, where Mario's riding on top of Yoshi and he's got his cape on. That was the first thing I colored on Mario Paint. It also had a mini game on it to where you could fly swat flies. There's different stages. The first stage was like little gnats. The second stage was like yellow jackets. And the third stage was like bigger bees, and then the big stage was the moth that you just had to constantly mash the left click on. But Super Mario World, Mega Man X, and probably have to say Donkey Kong 1 were probably my most played games. Mega Man X, most certainly. I spent the most time in that game. How about you?
So obviously there's a lot of crossover. There's a lot of those games were genre defining and definitely console defining. For me, there's only a couple weird exceptions that I'm just going to mention specifically, then we can kind of deep dive into some of the other ones that we played together, or that we both played it anyway. I think one of the funniest ones that I played that I enjoyed the most was like Zombies Ate My Neighbors. It's kind of ridiculous. The name is definitely made for kids. I think we rented it from Blockbuster. This is obviously the time period where you could rent video games and stuff like that. I can't remember if it was re-rented it or my uncle bought it, but it's one of those things where it's like you just kind of, basically it's a side scroller. To some extent, it did have like forward and backwards as well, so it wasn't entirely a side scroller, but it's a top down view, and you're kind of running through like the mall, through your neighborhood. You're killing zombies. You shoot them with like water guns and all this cool stuff. I just really enjoyed playing with my cousins and my uncles and stuff like that.
Is it kind of laid out like Zelda?
Yeah, it would be similar to Zelda in a lot of ways. It's but it's more. I don't want to say fast paced, but like it's not story driven. And like Zelda is, it's more just kind of like, but the top-down view where you kind of like, instead of like when you're inside the mall, obviously they're not going to like, you're not doing a behind your back shot like we do now in a third-person shot. It's a top-down view, so you kind of can like see the mall and like where the zombies are. You can kind of like shoot at them,
right? But it's not a side scroller like say Mega Man.
Right. Yeah, it's not really a side scroller. I misspoke more or less. It's not.
Okay.
There is side scrolling aspects because obviously you only have a certain window.
Yeah, it's still a 2D game, you know. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So it does have limitations, but it's one of those things where it's like it gave a lot of, like, for me, you know, because at that time period there was horror films were still pretty huge, and I was old enough where I could kind of enjoy those. Well, I shouldn't have been enjoying them. My mom was always kind of weird about that. She really tried to pretend like she wanted us to be Beaver Cleaver and stuff, like wanted us to be like like good kids, you know. And we'd be like out there scrambling to try to find like a Friday the 13th movie on like a HBO show, you know, one of those TV channels you didn't get without cable and stuff. And you just got like what's the word I'm looking for? Like it would like scroll a line through it, so you couldn't get it good enough. Like looked like a wave going down the screen, and we'd like do that. So my mom, she was weird about like that stuff, and then certain video games. And Zombies Ate My Neighbors was one of those. But my cousin, we would go visit him, and he was a little bit older than me, so his parents kind of let him get away with that sort of stuff. So we would watch scary movies. I got a funny story about Leprechaun that I'll tell one day with my brother. It's hilarious.
Well, tell it now.
Maybe I'll do it.
Tell it now.
No, I want to save it. Maybe we'll talk about like horror films one day, but
right.
we'll save it for later. That way we have something to talk about then.
That way you don't botch the story, right?
Right. Yeah. Give me just a few minutes on that one. Yeah. So another little small game that I remember, it's called ActRaiser. It was done similar. It's a top down, but then it also had side scrolling aspects. It had two different versions not two different versions, but there was two different pieces to the game. One is like a top down, you're a god and you're building a farm and that sort of stuff. And then you would go into certain like dungeons or whatever, and it'd become side scrolling. So you'd turn in from being floating in the air, looking like a fat Cupid baby almost, to coming down. You got this giant sword and you're like beating the hell out of people. It's pretty funny. So it's one of those games where it's like, I didn't really enjoy it at the time. I was like so mad that someone bought me this game because I was like, I don't understand. And I was just so upset. But a few years later, I remember getting back into it, and I was like, well, I'm going to give it a try. And I actually enjoyed playing it a lot. It was a one-player game, so I didn't get a lot of opportunities to play it, especially as a younger kid. Once I got a little bit older and my brother was kind of doing other things, or we'd have more than one console, that's one of the things that got kind of cool is we didn't have our own TVs, but I could hook up in one place, which is so funny when you think about it. It's like back then it was so much easier to hook up a console to a TV. Now it's like, a half-hour process just to do it. But back then you just plug in a couple buttons, you're good to go, or cutting a couple cords, you're good to go. And it's so funny. That was one of those games. Once my brother maybe had a Genesis, and he could play a couple games on Genesis, and I could play the Super Nintendo. I could take it into like my sister's room, or take it into the living room and play it on the TV out there.
You got the better end of that deal.
Yeah. I definitely ended up with a bigger TV, right? Like we had the old school TV.
I was talking about the better console.
Yeah, I guess I did win that one, didn't I? I think it was one of those things where I'm not really sure. My brother really wasn't into video games as a super young kid because he was 2 years younger than me. So he kind of got into video games much later. He's still pretty really into video games to this day. But it's one of those things where we sort of could split off and do other things. But one last game I want to talk about, just because I have a lot of fond memories. Obviously, if you were a kid in the late 80s, early 90s, if you didn't like WWF and wrestling in general, you kind of had some issues, I guess. Maybe not WWF. It wasn't, I guess by that point it was national, but a game came out. It was called WWF Royal Rumble. I had so much fun playing that game. And if I could find it and I had a Super Nintendo, I would play it today. That was the peak of near the peak of my wrestling fandom in terms of video games, especially. The cool thing about that one is it allowed, think about this, especially for the time period, it allowed 6 people to be in the ring at the same time in a Royal Rumble. And if you lost or died, you could go ahead and you could pick another one. So it's like you got to time it out. So you make sure you got the right player or the right guy or whatever, so that you had the best opportunities to be successful. And what we do is similar to like what we do in Streets of Rage. John would take the top half of the ring. I'd take the bottom half of the ring. We'd beat everybody up. We'd throw them out of the ring.
No,
so
I want to be entry 1 and I want to win the Rumble. That's how that works. I ain't cheating.
Unfortunately, the way that one worked, you got tired even as you wrestled. So eventually you got to the point where you couldn't throw anybody out, which kind of made it fun because it was, I guess, more quote unquote realistic, I guess. I mean, it's a video game. How realistic do you really need it to be, especially in 1990? But it's one of those things where I definitely enjoyed playing that. I think they had obviously they had tag team matches and single matches, but we basically only played Royal Rumble matches. And what we do, that's what we did. So we would write down on a notepad, like let's say there's 30 entrants, right? What we would do is we would pick 10 each. So I would pick my 10, he'd pick his 10. And then if we lost, we had to wait for one of those 10 to come in. So you were hoping that you would be like the last one. You get like entry number 30 so that you would have the freshest person when it was that time. It was like those sort of things. So we would even as young kids, we would like wager and make bets and have like those sort of like goofy things that we did, I guess, just to kind of help pass the time. But of course, for Super Nintendo, above all else, they did introduce like Donkey Kong Country, which was really good. But above all else, obviously, Super Mario All-Stars was probably the game, along with Super Mario World. But you got to think about that lineup, just Super Mario All-Stars, Super Mario World, and Donkey Kong Country. I mean, where do you go wrong? There's no wonder it was in our minds anyway, it was the number one console. I'm sure sales back it up as well, but there's absolutely no wonder.
Yeah, and another thing too, for me personally, the Super Nintendo transition from Super Nintendo was 16-bit graphics, 8-bit was NES. So the music was also a lot better too on Super Nintendo. And even as a young kid, I've always loved music, and I am a huge music fanatic now. I'm a big audio nerd. I'm a big tech nerd. So those things kind of go hand in hand for me. But Mega Man X, another reason it's probably one of my top favorite games, is the soundtrack to that game. All the boss themes just sound amazing. And even when you go back to Super Mario All-Stars, that revamped music sounds better on the Super Nintendo than it does on the NES console. And then you look at the graphics where everything looks, more smooth and rounded. Mario doesn't look super blocky. It really excelled the experience playing Mario 3 on Super Nintendo than what I remembered playing Mario 3 on NES. And, for me, it was probably only like a 1 or 2 year difference from when I played those games. Because, like you said, the NES was already released and launched before we were born.
Yeah, it was towards the end of its actual life cycle. And I totally agree. What's so funny is I'm not really a music nerd. I like music, but I don't really think about like the video game musics. But it is kind of funny when you think about it. If you took the music out of it, it's amazing how maybe your experience would change. Me being someone that doesn't really pay attention to it, but it gets your heart moving. It gets you moving. Like it gets a physical response out of me especially like you said, when the boss notes. I don't really recall Mega Man X. I didn't really play it that much, but even in Super Mario, when that timer's going down, for example, and that different music hits, and you're like, oh crap, I need to hurry up, like those certain things where it's like there was never words spoken for the most part. It was all just music, but they did a great job in terms of like speeding it up when it was telling you, listen, you got to move, or like slowing it down, or just like the certain notes they would hit or the way they would deliver it. It's amazing how much different it would kind of change your personal, like, get your heartbeat moving, get you racing, get you kind of going. I've always been, I guess, in tune to that sort of stuff. Maybe I don't always have the like, I couldn't explain it in a great way sometimes, but I definitely can tell you that, yeah, you could definitely see a huge difference just coming from the regular Nintendo system to the Super Nintendo. And like you said, it being more rounded is starting to shape that like new experience, the kind of more quote unquote realistic. Obviously, it's Mario. They never really went super realistic except for that god awful movie they released. But other than
and the cartoon show,
so they never went super duper realistic, but they did a better job of trying to round it off and make it just overall, like you said, it's way more crisp, and that's very noticeable in Super Mario World, for example. Just adding in Yoshi and some of these other small little things that make a huge difference, or even in Donkey Kong Country where you're swimming underwater, no less. And like, even though it was a little glitchy at times, it still was like, it was definitely pushing that. You said it was 16 bits, pushing that 16 bits to its limit, just to be able to kind of like, think about it. Swimming underwater. I guess you did in Mario as well. You swam underwater, but it wasn't the same. It basically was just Mario flying underwater. It wasn't it wasn't the same as Donkey Kong where you're actually swimming and you have that slight delay in your.
Yeah, it wasn't a different mechanic,
buttons.
Really.
Right. So it's just one of those things where they probably were pushing it to the limit, though.
Yeah, they definitely made Donkey Kong feel more fluid swimming in water. And the other thing, too, is like, I keep going back to music, but like you look at games like Mario and Donkey Kong and those underwater levels, that music kind of backs that theme up, especially like with Mario, when that little and when it's like, oh shit, time to go. Like I got to speed run this stuff, before we knew what speed running was.
Yeah. And like the tropical versions, like what you said, when you're underwater, it was a little more tropical, kind of puts you in that mindset, even if you didn't necessarily have, like, I don't know when the first time you visited the beach was, but, when you don't even have those mindsets, like what it is to be at a beach, or maybe like those sort of thought processes, then you kind of get this tropical feel. Obviously, we see them in movies and stuff, but there's a difference from like truly experiencing it or seeing it. So it's like one of those things where it definitely puts you in that mood, I guess, is the best way to say it. Well, when you went to those underwater worlds.
Oh yeah, for sure. Hey, I've got a list here pulled up of the best-selling games for Super Nintendo. What do you think's number one?
I'm gonna go with All Stars.
You're close. Super Mario World was number one with 20 million. Super Mario All Stars was number two with 10.5.
Yeah, I probably would have guessed Super Mario World, but I didn't think that. I thought that the nostalgia part would have brought more people back. But I do believe Super Mario World probably is the better. I guess for the value, probably not. But it's the one I probably played the most. Well, I don't know. It's toss up, right? Because as much as I remember Super Mario World, I probably played Super Mario Brothers 3 on All Stars probably at least twice as much as the regular NES. Give me some other ones.
Okay, I'll just I'll run through the top 10 here. And then we'll talk about the top 10, and then I could run through the rest of this list. There's 49 on this list, and actually running through this list, there's some games on here that I even forgot to put in my own list, and I'll kind of hit those as we get to them. But top 10 is Super Mario World, Super Mario All-Stars, Donkey Kong Country, Super Mario Kart, Street Fighter 2, Donkey Kong Country 2, Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past, which I didn't even list on my list that I played. Super Mario World 2, Yoshi's Island, another game that I didn't put on my list. Street Fighter 2 Turbo, Donkey Kong Country 3. Those were your top 10 selling games for SNES.
Isn't it wild that Street Fighter's on there twice? I'm sure there's differences, but they released Street Fighter 2 like 12 times.
Well, that's because Street Fighter was doing quote-unquote DLCs before DLC was a thing. I mean, Street Fighter, once we get into like Street Fighter 3, there's like 6 different versions of that game.
Yeah, it's crazy to think of, and that they all did well. Like that's the thing. It's like it's not like, I mean, I'm sure there's some bombs in there. Don't get me wrong, but I'm saying like if you just generally look through all of them, it's amazing how well they've kind of stood the test of time and has been successful. Obviously, this Street Fighter 2 is still played to this day in esports, I would guess, right? I know Paul was doing it pretty, at least in tournaments and stuff, for a while there. So it's kind of amazing to think that, I mean, this game came out, I don't know exactly when, but it was in the 90s, very early 90s, maybe the late 80s, and it's still rolling today.
Yeah, Street Fighter 2 World Warrior was 1992, and Street Fighter 2 Turbo, which is the more popular one, I think, at least in my opinion, is 1993.
So we're talking about at least 17 years. Yeah, but we're talking about 17 years ago.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Or no, 27 years ago. I apologize. 27 years ago. So you're talking about something that's, you know, this thing could do everything in the world now. I mean, it can smoke, it can drink, it can do everything. You know, it can rent a darn car you know, it's amazing, and it's still played to this day. Obviously, a couple other games like on there, the Donkey Kong, and that's the one I probably played the most, was the original Donkey Kong Country. I know you had some more experience with the Donkey Kong Country 2 and 3. If you want to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I don't remember much about Donkey Kong 2, honestly. I do remember it was a little more interactive. The staging was a little better. I do remember a decent amount of Donkey Kong 3 because it introduced new characters to the list. It had the baby Kong in the blue like nightgown. I think his name was Diddy or Pity, or I don't remember exactly. And it also introduced Trixie, who was the girl monkey. I think it was Diddy's niece or Donkey's niece, if I remember right. But it also added a couple new mechanics with her. You know, she could hover across the map, which changed that game drastically for me as far as the hovering goes. And the stage layout was a lot different. The bosses were more fun. And that's saying a lot because even the bosses in the original Donkey Kong Country were all pretty fun and unique, you know, more so than like bosses like in Mario, you know what I mean? Like Bowser. I mean, you can only kill Bowser the same way 8 times, you know, 8 stages in the game. It's all the same. As far as Donkey Kong, I had a lot of fun with those 3 games. My roommate, he is a Donkey Kong 1 fanatic. He prided himself on that being his first game that he used to complete and run back and forth, you know, in 100% completion, you know, before achievements were a thing. You know, that was the goal in single player games was, can you beat a game 100%, you know, front to back and know the ins and outs of that game. And that was Donkey Kong 1.
That's amazing. Give a couple quick ones on there. So in Donkey Kong 2, Country 2, it was obviously Diddy was already there, but it introduced Dixie at the time. And then they introduced in the third one, I lost that one. I apologize. I lost it. You can keep going.
I think it was Trixie.
Kitty Kong. It's
Kitty Kong.
Kitty.
Okay, yeah.
Kitty Kong. Yeah, I apologize. I found it. Kitty Kong. Yeah, I like I said, I didn't have a whole lot of experience with the second or the third one. When I was a kid, quick little story about Donkey Kong. I went to my uncle's house, or my grandfather's house, really, and my uncle, which is the one that's only a couple years older than me, he got a Super Nintendo with Donkey Kong. That came with Donkey Kong Country, came with the game, with that system, and he got that for Christmas. And I remember just being so pissed off. Like, I was a Sega guy, so it's like I was trying not to enjoy it. I was like, this is bullcrap, you know? And I was like, this is not for me. No. And, you know, and I was like throwing temper tantrums, like, no, I don't want to play it. No, you go play it. You know, you go do it, you know? And then eventually I kind of was like, either he went to bed or, you know, it's like one of those things where I didn't want to get chastised about it. So I was like, I'm going to wait till he like leaves or, you know, cause he's always been a movie guy. So he would go rent a lot of movies from Blockbuster and stuff like that. And he'd bring them home. We'd watch them. And I remember, I think specifically that day, either I got up earlier than he did, or he went and rented movies. I can't remember which. It's one of those two things. I've always been a morning person, and I remember getting up early. I think that's what happened. Is I got up early one day, and I'm out there playing it, and I just remember him coming around the corner, and he'd give him this smile, like, I told you you'd like this game. And I just remember being so mad that he saw me playing it, but I was like so into it. It was so much different. Basic premises are so much similar, where it's just a side scroller game where you collect stuff and bop enemies, whatever. But it was definitely had its own feel to it. It was different. It was one of those things where it was like, you got to really, truly, like you said, the bosses were unique. It didn't feel like you were just bopping on the heads. They had their own things that made them unique. It was definitely a lot of fun. You can keep going with the list. I'm not sure. I think we kind of covered most of the top 10.
Yeah, we covered the top 10, but there's some games on here that I see that I know that me and you have both played that I don't think we've mentioned. Killer Instinct, one of those games. Aladdin and Lion King. Super Mario RPG for myself. I forgot to list that one. I know you haven't played that one. Mortal Kombat. We haven't talked about that. And one thing that actually kind of caught my attention was Dragon Ball Z Super Budoten. Don't kill me if I mispronounce that.
Or when you mispronounce it. It's not that you did or didn't. We know you did.
Because I am a huge Dragon Ball Z fan, and I didn't even know those games existed on Super Nintendo because I didn't start watching Dragon Ball Z until I was 12.
Middle school, I'd guess,
yeah,
right?
12 or 13. School. I was in 6th grade when it came out.
Yeah, it was on... were you watching it on the on Cartoon Network?
Yes.
Okay, so you were watching it during like the 4 to 5 o'clock hour like me?
Yeah.
Or was it 3 to 4?
4 to 5, I believe.
I'm pretty sure.
I had to go up to my grandma's to watch it because she had a satellite TV. She had Dish Network. I was poor. We didn't have cable growing up.
Well, like that's one of the funny things about you and I. I was born in a city. It's a city, I guess.
I was born in a city too. What do you think? I just dropped in from the damn forest.
Well, you were born in a rural North Carolina. You were born in a small city. We're not talking. I mean, we're talking about what is your city now? City's like probably less than 10,000 people, right?
Yeah, right now. I mean, I was technically born in Lincoln.
Yeah.
But where I live is, it's about 3,000-4,000 people.
Right. So the city I grew up probably 25,000 people. So just kind of put in perspective, at least it's amazing that you and I are friends to some extent because we grew up with like polar opposites in terms of like how we grew up anyway. But yes, when I was a kid, we had access to just more options. This is the way it was when you live in a major city. I guess I wouldn't even call it a major city, but
metropolitan
a bigger
area.
City. Yeah, I mean, I guess it was outside of Tampa. So it's like, it was kind of, but it wasn't quite there yet. It is considered now, but not at the time, not when I was living there. But anyway, yeah, it gave when I was in middle school, we got out at 3:30. So like I would like pray that the bus was not behind because I would be 3:15, I guess it was, because I would like get home right on time for Dragon Ball Z. And one of the kids I went to school with actually turned me on to it. So it's like, he's like, man, you got to watch this. And you got to remember that at the time I was still like really into sports and like I didn't really get none of that crap. So really, that's what you're watching? He's like, yeah, man, dude, just watch it. I guess he convinced my brother enough that my brother started watching it, and then I started watching it with him. So yeah, I didn't get into it until I was about the same age, 11, 12, 13, somewhere. I guess it was 11 or 12. Because I was definitely in middle school.
Yeah, because at that time we had pretty much just dropped the whole cartoons. Watching like Saturday morning cartoons and stuff like that. We were starting to kind of grow up into be young teenagers, kind of like how everything embarrasses you, your parents start to embarrass you, that whole phase of your life. So when someone says, hey man, watch Dragon Ball Z, and you're like, bro, that's a cartoon. I'm too old for that. And they're like, no, man, it's not a cartoon, it's an anime. And I'm like, what the hell is that?
Right, yeah. It's kind of funny, because I know we've segued a little bit here, but it's just kind of funny to think back, I guess, to that time period in my life. And it's just, my parents had just bought a house, and I was getting used to, like, I guess that was part of it. So, like, my parents had just bought the house a few years, I guess maybe a year, or right around that time period. I'm meeting all these new people, these new kids I'd never met. I live on obviously we live on a street, but I live on like in a neighborhood, and I had like 10 or 15 kids that live on my street with me. So it's like, you start to expand a little bit. You're starting to think about new things. And I guess they convinced me one day, and he's like, yeah, man, it's cool. And same thing. A lot of these kids didn't have brothers, so they didn't grow up with an annoying brother that was 2 years younger than you, whereas I did. So it's one of those things where it's like, I guess we started to bond over weird things, and that was one of those weird things. And I was so surprised. That was a game that I ended up liking, but or a TV series I ended up liking. But to kind of get back on track, Lion King and Aladdin, yeah, it's kind of funny. I obviously those sales were 100% influenced by the movies and not necessarily by gameplay.
Yeah,
but they weren't terrible for what they were.
No, they weren't.
We also talked about Mortal Kombat, or you also mentioned Mortal Kombat. That one, I think, I played more than any of the fighting games. I never really got into I'd be button mashing on Street Fighter, and I get there's a lot more to it than that. But
I'd be button mashing on every fighting game.
That's just the way it is, right?
And
so it's one of those things where,
obviously Mortal Kombat holds that attention because of the fatalities. When you're young and stuff like that, you're like, oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, and the blood, the gore. It's just amazing the differences, and of course they did a good job of giving you story and some backstory to kind of rope you in. Of course, if it wasn't for Sub-Zero, I don't think I'd care about Mortal Kombat at all. He was my man. He's the guy I was all about. He was the one that, at this time period, you didn't have the internet. We didn't have the ability to be like, oh, well, how do I do this move? Or how do I do that fatality? You're just like, I accidentally pressed back twice and then this happened, or forward twice, whatever it was to do his freeze move. I don't know how that happened. And then you're like trying to figure it out. And then you get your butt kicked a bunch of times because you're worried about trying to figure out how to do that move again. I know they had some books that would have all that stuff listed in it, but
yeah, we had magazines. We had to read.
But but you got to think about
YouTube videos,
right? As a 6-year-old kid, how long am I going to pay attention to reading before I'm just like, F this, I'm going to figure it out myself, whatever. They don't know anything. So you just kind of gave up. But I do remember I would write down, like, this is how ridiculous I was as a kid. Instead of trying to convince my parents to buy a book that was super expensive for the time period, I would just like, I would bring a pencil or a pen with me and I would write the fatalities down like on my hand or on a piece of paper out of the book, like just write it down. And then I would come home and then of course I'd mess up on the on the writing it down, or I couldn't read my own stupid handwriting and I couldn't get then I wasted all that time and I couldn't get the fatality to work anyway. And then I'd just be so upset. One game we kind of glossed over in the top 10 that I just wanted to kind of circle around back to is Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. That game's still played to this day by a lot of people.
Yeah, it's a very popular speedrunning game, and it has a randomizer with it.
Yeah, so it's like, as a kid, I know I briefly mentioned that I didn't play Mega Man that much. I never really got into Zelda either. I was, like I said, when I was a kid, it had to be, for the most part, a 2-player game. Those games didn't have that option for me, so I didn't really play them that much, but I can definitely appreciate them today. I couldn't then. It took a lot of things to kind of convince me, but yeah, it's amazing, that it's stuck basically it's still just only on Nintendo. And I know that it drove the Wii U and the Switch. It's a reason people still buy a lot of these consoles, just to play and they're playing, a lot of them, they're just playing remakes of other games that I didn't even know was released before that. They're just re-releasing the game on there, and people are like, I want to play this on this new system. And it's amazing that it's carrying it so far.
Yeah, and the other thing that I kind of want to touch base with too is like these older games, even in today's time, I mean, they still have a pretty big audience and a huge following behind them. I mean, because if you go to Twitch right now, there's a lot of people that still speedrun these old style games. Unlike today's games where a game is made and then it's released, half finished, and then the developer just patches in a new update to give you a finished product when it should have been finished to begin with. These old games, once they got boxed up and shipped out, that's how that game played forever. There's a lot of people now in the community that take these old games and they'll rewrite them, which I find is phenomenal. For example, like Mega Man X, there's a version out there where people make, same way with Zelda Link to the Past, where they make it a randomizer. So like if you go, say in Mega Man, you defeat the first stage, say if you go to Chill Penguin and you kill him, most of the time you always get the ice shot. Well, in this randomizer, you could click Chill Penguin stage and you might go to Flame Mammoth. And then once you go to Flame Mammoth and beat the boss, you may get a completely different, you might get the boomerang, or if you jump in this capsule where you get the helmet upgrade, you may get a dash. It's completely random, so it completely changes the way you played the game. In the same way in Zelda Link to the Past, where you might go to get the boomerang, it ain't there. You go and pick it up and you may get the lantern. So it kind of adds a little bit of spice to the game. Like I said, the speed running, it's always really cool to sit here and watch some guy beat this game in 20 minutes when it used to take you a week or a month or several months to do as a young kid.
Yeah. What I find so funny is, like you're saying, that they just hold up. How many times do you go back and play an Xbox game from the original Xbox?
Not very often.
No, I mean, there's still the occasional 360 game I'll play, but like for the most part, you don't really dig back into those old games. But if I had a Super Nintendo, I would definitely play. And I know there was a time period I considered buying those for my kids. When they re-released the preloaded games on the consoles, that you could buy, and I think that's something I'm gonna have to do because they're spoiled. They don't understand the frustration and the love and the purity of these old games. I think that's part of it, right? So like your attention span today just isn't the same as it was 20-25 years ago. And you had to have patience. These games, if you were, of course, there's speedrun guys. They play this where they kind of know where this bolt is going to go. Whatever, they know exactly what's going to happen. So it's slightly different. But I'm saying, as a normal person playing these video games, you have to have patience. You have to understand, kind of like, okay, well, if I go too fast and I fall in the lava, well, then maybe I shouldn't do that. And it's a lot of trial and error. These days, kids can just like you say. We had a conversation about this. I think it was a couple days ago. That they tell you where to do everything. Like I don't think about video games like I guess I did back in the day. Like I was playing. I played Assassin's Creed 3. It's a remastered version on the Xbox One. Just really just to piss away some time. And I couldn't figure out how to get to one of these stupid viewpoints. And I was like, all right, I'm done playing. Like I didn't even bother. Like, it was as sad as it is to admit that, I was like, I couldn't figure it out. I was like, friggin', I'm done. I just quit playing. I went and did something else. It's just one of those things where it's like, but when you were a kid, and especially in these time periods, it's like you only had so many lives. They didn't hold your hand. They didn't tell you.
You didn't have no.
You need to go this way. You couldn't just pull up on your phone like, hey, how do I get to this stage, or how do I do this, or how do I do that, or whatever. This day, like these time period, all you had was like your buddies. It's like, they used to always talk about water cooler talk, and of course ours was like water fountain talk because we didn't have water coolers. So it's like or playground talk, whatever. It's like that was the thing. You'd like talk about, man, this one time have you ever been to this level? Did you ever make it to World 8? Those sort of things. And it's like you just, oh yeah, I think that was where I first heard about the like the whistles and things like that. Like I think, well, besides my parent, like I think my mom might have showed me the whistle the first time, but it's like the first time I heard a kid tell me the story, he's like, man, this one time I did this one thing, and like you're like, whoa, mind blown, like,
yeah.
and it was probably his older brother that showed him it anyway. But like, you always retell these stories to benefit yourself, so it was kind of funny just to like, it was. I guess the community was just so much different then. And I know that a lot of these, how you say, Twitch streamers and things like that, they do a good job of trying to build that community again. But man, it's hard to recreate that. Like, even hell, we did that even when we worked together. Whereas like on breaks and lunches and stuff, dude, we talked about video games. That was like our thing. We spent all day, every day talking about video games. Like, oh man, did you this one time? Or like, hey, tonight when we get off, let's go do this, 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 and this. And it's like, all right, man, let's do that. And it's like, it's just amazing. Like, I guess kind of what video games can bring people together. Can kind of, I'm sure it's torn plenty of people apart, but for the most part, it's just kind of like, it really builds that solid foundation, or at least something that you always have in common. And that's something that, like, me and my brother, or even when I would go through weird spells where I got into girls or whatever, and I kind of fell out of love with video games, he'd always find a way to rope me back in through those sort of things. And it's kind of amazing that, we're talking about video games that happened that were in 1990. Up to obviously I'm gonna let you talk about Mario RPG here in just a second, but and that was released in like the late 90s. So it's like this console lasted a long time, especially for it being, a 16-bit cartridge-based game. Like, it's kind of amazing. But if you want to talk a little bit about Mario RPG, kind of give me a kind of rundown of what happened there.
Just to touch on what you just said a little bit there, but in today's time, like if you're playing a story game and you get stuck, you don't know where to go, you just pull out your phone, you YouTube how to get to blah, 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 and you figure it out, and then you just play the game, and that's about it. Like you said, though, back in those days, it was, you get stuck on a stage, you go to school, you talk to your homies, and maybe somebody's got to that stage, and they tell you how to do it. And how video games themselves just make memories. And memories is one of these things that people kind of often overlook in human society, because we're too busy chasing money, or we're chasing success, or fame, or women, or whatever your poison is. There's a lot of distractions in life. Memories are something that you can't really buy. It's, to me, memories it's a very important part of my life, because, those are the things that you look back on and you have positive thoughts, you have negative thoughts, you build from memories. And like you said, talking at work, our friendship is pretty much created off the premises of those memories that we had. That's what got the train rolling for us really to become such good friends. So that part, I'm grateful for video games in that aspect of my life, creating those memories to hold on to. And I'll have those memories, until the day that I die. Whereas children nowadays, they have all this technology they're coming out, they're playing games that are already on PS5. 4-year-olds are on PS5 and Xbox One Series X and PCs and stuff. They got it all, and they already know how to go to YouTube. You know what I mean? We didn't have that. So very, very grateful for growing up within that generation as well. Kind of having to stand on your own 2 feet a little bit, figure out how to get the job done. There wasn't always an answer in your pocket to get you out of trouble. To wrap that up and move on to Super Mario RPG, it was released in 1996, which I'm sure at that point the Nintendo 64 was already out. But Super Mario RPG was the first game I played that was an RPG, because I didn't play Chrono Trigger, which I might get flamed on for that, because that's another popular one, and Secret of Mana, another popular RPG. But Super Mario RPG was the first, I'm not going to say the first turn-based fighting game, because obviously Final Fantasy kind of claimed that title. But it was the first story game that was deeper than the normal Mario games, because, the Mario games, their story was pretty simple. Princess Peach, she got her dumbass lost, Bowser kidnapped her, go get Princess and get your booty. You know what I mean? Super Mario RPG was an actual, story-based driven game that had a lot of context in it, and it had, equipable, pants and shirts and gloves and weapons and that kind of stuff, where you could actually build up stats on your character. You had attack, defense, and specialty. So how much power your special skills did. And it was the Mario characters, so you had that, you had Mario, you had Bowser, you had Peach, the character in there named Geno, Mallow, and I think there was someone else there that I missed. I don't know, it's irrelevant. But that game, it was also made by Square, which at the time, I didn't play mini games made by Square, because they were kind of too busy doing the Final Fantasy stuff. So it was kind of cool for that collaboration for Nintendo and Square to come together, because obviously Square is king, because they made Final Fantasy. So you take the best RPG game already on the market, and then you pair it with the best selling game on the market, which is, Mario, and you mash them together, and to me it was a super game. Because some of the bigger developers back then was Square, Nintendo, Capcom, and then you had these other kind of one-off companies, that made their individual games. I'm looking at this list now, there's Iguana Entertainment made NBA Jam, or Sculpted Software made Mortal Kombat 3. Heartbeat made Dragon Quest. Some of these games, they're not very known publishers. And then obviously you had Rare, which made Donkey Kong. It wasn't like it was today, where you got a million different game developers and 3 or 4 game publishers.
Yeah, well, I think that it gave you a little more. Well, I guess not, but it's one of those things where I feel like definitely in that time period, cool thing was if you had a good idea, I think that you had an opportunity. And obviously today we have almost an influx of too many games, but yeah, it's amazing. I never got a chance to play Mario RPG. I think had it been released 3 years earlier, it would have been a huge game. I think that was the unfortunate. I mean, I'm sure it still did okay, but like I said, Nintendo 64 was already out. People were already playing, Mario 64.
It was number 19 on the list of best-selling games. It sold 2.1 million copies. So it still definitely did good.
And that alone is amazing when you think about it. Like you said, it was released in 96. This console was 6 years old. And you got to think, the progress, I know that it doesn't seem like it made a huge progress, but from 1990 to 1996 is a massive. I mean, it's not as big as today. Like if you compare 2000 or 2006, 2012, that sort of stuff. But in terms of technology at that time, that's a huge leap. I mean, PlayStation 1 was already out on a disc. You know what I'm saying? We were already running disc games at this time period. So it was huge. Like I said, for it to still do over 2 million sales is amazing. That's something that, if you had asked me, Chris, how many do you think it sold? I would have been way off, because I would have not guessed that many, because it was, and I guess it may have done well just because a lot of these, we were young still, so we didn't get always the newest thing at the time period. Now we could, if we wanted to, I guess, we could go out and buy any console we want to. Back then, not so much. It was one of those situations where you had to beg your parents or hope. They did a smart job. They released a lot of these consoles right around Christmas time. Obviously, it'd be kind of foolish to release it in the middle of spring, right? So it's one of those things where it's like they did a good job of releasing it when it needed to be released, to be as successful as possible. Even though they can't seem to make consoles these days, I don't understand that one. How you could
just
not make enough.
Yeah, just to touch up on what you said, about 6-year difference. If the SNES, it came out in what, 92 or 90?
Came out in 1990, yeah.
Okay. The internet came out. It didn't come out, but it was made public in 1993. So that was the first time the internet was available to use for anybody, and at that time it was only dial-up. I would say the internet probably still didn't even become popular until around 96, 98, or 97, 98, back when Windows transitioned from Windows 95 to Windows 98, their operating system.
Yeah, I remember in my hometown of getting the internet probably in the early 2000s. I'm sure it was there before, but there really wasn't much to do. Like, it's not like today, right? At the time, you just kind of could watch, and at that time, it was all about your .coms. You had to own your .coms. Yeah, and emailing. So it was definitely not what we were used to. The very late 90s is when a lot of the MMOs started to be built. So yeah, that's when I guess it would have taken off, like you said, in 98. But in my hometown and what I remember, I didn't remember asking about internet until the probably early 2000s.
Yeah, I think my first experience with internet played game was probably Diablo 2 on PC.
Yeah, and mine was EverQuest. We'll talk about that another time. We've done a pretty good job here on Super Nintendo. I'm sure there's some other games that other people can mention that they've enjoyed or played. A lot of this, Tiny Toon Adventure is another one that was kind of goofy for us as kids.
I forgot all about that one.
I got a list here, but I wrote down anything that kind of resembled anything we might know. But yeah, Tiny Toon Adventures, you said it had like a football game. It's hard to remember because I haven't played it probably since I was like 6. Like I didn't buy the game. It's probably a game I rented from Blockbuster or something. They used to let you rent it for like 4 days or 5 days or something. So and we had school and other things that would go on, so you didn't get to play as much as maybe you'd like to. But anything you remember about Tiny Toons?
I don't remember much about the game. I remember the intro stage. You were stuck in the high school and you had to get away. I remember the train. I remember the mine cart after the train, the mini games in between the stages mainly. I still don't remember the last level. I don't even know if I beat the game, to be honest with you. I probably have, but I still have it. Like, all these consoles we're talking about today, I still have the original hardware. I still have all my games for them. They're actually sitting on my, what's that fancy word, a media console underneath your TV. Oh. Yeah. I've done grown up in the world. I'm uppity.
Maybe one day we'll have to take some. We might have to do some speed runs.
Yeah, man. Because I got the front loader NES, the top loader NES, the SNES, the 64, the Dreamcast. They're all sitting up there, ready to go. They're hooked up, ready to rock and roll. So you just come on over, and we'll make this podcast a reality.
That's right. Any other parting or final thought processes or any final words about this generation? I know we lumped technically 2 generations together with the NES, Super Nintendo, and the Sega Genesis, but unfortunately we didn't have a lot of time with the NES, so it's tough to kind of break that generation up because, and quite frankly, no other real video game console broke through in that generation besides them. I'm sure there's plenty we could talk about failed ones one day. But is there any parting words you could maybe, or even just thoughts about this generation of consoles?
About the only thing I can say that I haven't said already was just, I think they were released in a time period that just met really well with my own time period. I was just the right age when these consoles came out. The games is just what made the consoles so good. Whereas in today's time, the hardware is what makes consoles so good. Games in today's time, I don't want to sound like an old man, but all the games now, they've already been done. They're kind of played out. You know what I mean? We're on like the 7th Halo game and the 6th Gears of War game and we're just playing a bunch of sequels. It's very hard for games nowadays to come out with something new and invigorating. Whereas back then, about every game was new and invigorating. Even every Mario game was new and invigorating, and it was still Mario. It was still a sequel, kind of.
Yeah, so I guess my parting words would be, like you say, it was like the perfect time. these video games and the consoles kind of grew with us, right? Like in general, specifically talking about like the current like timeline we are on, it's like we age perfectly to kind of grow into each of the consoles as they seem to be released. Kind of amazing when you think about it. But like the pure innocence of a lot of these, obviously you got some crazy ones that were a little more out there, Mortal Kombat and that sort of stuff. But they tend to give you just enough, but not too much. For the most part, a lot of this had so much innocence and purity and just, I don't know, they just kind of hit you in the feels, you know? It's,
Yeah.
it's kind of amazing, you know, because like when I was a kid, all these were like, you know, if you talk to my dad, and you've met my dad, if you talk to my dad, he's one of those guys, he's like, that's bullshit. You don't need to be playing that crap, you know, that sort of thing. That's just kind of how my dad is.
Yeah.
Those are for kids, you know. And I'm like, Dad, I am a kid, you know. So this is like, so this is
Parents forget
of course
that sometimes.
Yeah, it's like, well, Dad, they're made for me. That's kind of how it is. But yeah, it like you said, it came out perfectly at the right time. I mean, granted, we was a little bit behind the times, at least in this generation. It couldn't have probably been timed out any better. It was just like, I have so many fond memories of like spending time, and it's not just my brother, you know, I do have a lot of fond memories playing with my brother, some with my mom. Like I said, she played a lot of video games with us. She would play Sonic with us as well. I didn't mention that, but I didn't mention she played Bubsy. But we had a lot of fun just like I said, and she loved columns. That was her jam, by the way. We'll get that out there. She loved columns. She'd play the heck out of that game. Of course, it's a puzzle game. So like me, I'm like, Mom, for the love of God, can we play something else? I am over this, you know. I can only watch the darn things fall so many times. But you know, just the like you said, memories is that's if there's nothing else, we have that. Like at the end of the day, when we see each other, when you see people you haven't seen in a while, it's not like, hey, what are you doing? What did you do yesterday? It's like, do you remember this one time when we did this one thing? You know, you're talking about memories and things that you did together, and like, you know, I can remember distinctly playing with so many of my like. I didn't really play with friends really on video games at this time, but like my brother, my cousins, my uncles, you know, my mom, and just like those time periods, like that time in my life, I can, you know, I'd go back and do it again. Like if I could, I'd go back and I'd do it again. Like that time period, I was so innocent, so it's such a unique time in the world. It's just amazing.
If you made it this far, we appreciate it. Thank you for listening to the Chris and Bud Show. This has been our pleasure. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at Chris and Bud Show 1, at Deliberate88, and at BudB88. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week.